Welcome. My name is Marianne, and I'm going to read you a story. So sit back and relax as you listen to the story of Maria Concepcion by Katharine Ann Porter. Maria Concepcion walked carefully, keeping to the middle of the white, dusty road, where the maguey thorns and the treacherous carved spines of Oregon cactus had not gathered so profusely. She would have enjoyed resting for a moment in the dark shade by the roadside, but she had no time to waste drawing cactus needles from her feet. Juan and his chief would be waiting for their food in the damp trenches of the buried city. She carried about a dozen living fowls slung over her right shoulder, their feet fastened together. Half of them fell upon the flat of her back. The balance dangled uneasily over her breast. They wriggled their benumbed and swollen legs against her neck. They twisted their stupefied eyes and peered into her face inquiringly. She did not see them or think of them. Her left arm was tired with the weight of the food basket, and she was hungry after her long morning's work. Her straight back outlined itself strongly under her clean, bright blue cotton rebozo. Instinctive serenity softened her black eyes, shaped like almonds, set far apart and tilted a bit endwise. She walked with the free, natural, guarded ease of the primitive woman carrying an unborn child. The shape of her body was easy. The swelling life was not a distortion, but the right, inevitable proportions of a woman. She was entirely contented. Her husband was at work, and she was on her way to market to sell her fowls. Her small house sat halfway up a shallow hill, under a clump of pepper trees, a wall of Oregon cactus enclosing it, side nearest to the road. Now she came down into the valley, divided by the narrow spring, and crossed a bridge of loose stones near the hut where Maria Rosa, the beekeeper, lived with her old godmother, Lupe, the medicine woman. Maria Concepcion had no faith in the charred owl bones, the singed rabbit fur, the cat entrails, the messes and ointments sold by Lupe to the ailing of the village. She was a good Christian and drank simple herb teas for headache and stomachache, or bought her remedies bottled, with printed directions that she could not read, at the drugstore near the city market, where she went almost daily. But she often bought a jar of honey from young Maria Rosa, a pretty shy child, only 15 years old. Maria Concepcion and her husband, Juan Villegas, were each a little past their 18th year. She had a good reputation with the neighbors as an energetic religious woman who could drive a bargain to the end. It was commonly known that if she wished to buy a new rebozo for herself or a shirt for Juan, she could bring out a sack of hard silver coins for the purpose. She had paid for the license nearly a year ago, the potent bit of stamped paper which permits people to be married in the church. She had given money to the priest before she and Juan walked together up to the altar the Monday after Holy Week. It had been the adventure of the villagers to go 3 Sundays, one after another, to hear the bands called by the priest for Juan de Dios Villegas and Maria Concepcion Manriquez, who were actually getting married in the church instead of behind it, which was the usual custom, less expensive, and as binding as any other ceremony. But Maria Concepcion was always as proud as if she owned a hacienda. She paused on the bridge and dabbled her feet in the water, her eyes resting themselves from the sun rays in a fixed gaze to the far-off mountains, deeply blue under their hanging drift of clouds. It came to her that she would like a fresh crust of honey, the delicious aroma of bees, their slow, thrilling hum, awakened a pleasant desire for a flake of sweetness in her mouth. If I do not eat it now, I shall mark my child, she thought, peering through the crevices in the thick hedge of cactus that sheared up nakedly, like bared knife blades set protectingly around the small clearing. The place was so silent, she doubted if Maria Rosa and Lupe were at home. Leaning jackal of dried rush withes and corn sheaves bound to tall saplings thrust into the earth, roofed with yellowed maguey leaves, flattened and overlapping like shingles, hunched drowsy and fragrant in the warmth of noonday. The hives, similarly made, were scattered towards the back of the clearing, like small mounds of clean vegetable refuse. Over each mound there hung a dusty golden shimmer of bees. A light gay scream of laughter rose from behind the hut. A man's short laugh joined in. Ah, ha, 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 went the voices together, high and low, like a song. So Maria Rosa has a man. Maria Concepcion stopped short, smiling, shifted her burden slightly, and bent forward, shading her eyes, to see more clearly through the spaces of the hedge. Maria Rosa ran, dodging between beehives, parting two stunted jasmine bushes as she came, lifting her knees in swift leaps, looking over her shoulder, and laughing in a quivering, excited way. A heavy jar swung to her wrist by the handle, knocked against her thighs as she ran. Her toes pushed up sudden spurts of dust. Her half-raveled braids showered around her shoulders in long, crinkled wisps. Gus ran after her, also laughing strangely, his teeth set, both rows gleaming behind the small, soft black beard growing sparsely on his lips, his chin, leaving his brown cheeks girl smooth. When he seized her, he clenched so hard her chemise gave way and ripped from her shoulder. She stopped, laughing at this, pushed him away, and stood silent, trying to pull up the torn sleeve with one hand. Her pointed chin and dark red mouth moved in an uncertain way, as if she wished to laugh again. Her long black lashes flickered with the quick moving lights in her hidden eyes. Maria Concepcion did not stir nor breathe for some seconds. Her forehead was cold, and yet boiling water seemed to be pouring slowly along her spine. An unaccountable pain was in her knees, as if they were broken. She was afraid Juan and Maria Rosa would feel her eyes fixed upon them and would find her there, unable to move, spying upon them. But they did not pass beyond the enclosure, nor even glance towards the gap in the wall opening upon the road. Juan lifted one of Maria Rosa's loosened braids and slapped her neck with it playfully. She smiled softly, consentingly. Together they moved back through the hives of honeycomb. Maria Rosa balanced her jar on one hip and swung her long, full petticoats with every step. Juan flourished his wide hat back and forth, walked proudly as a gamecock. Maria Concepcion came out of the heavy cloud which enwrapped her head and bound her throat, and found herself walking onward, keeping the road without knowing it, feeling her way delicately, her ears strumming as if all Maria Rosa's bees had hived in them. Her careful sense of duty kept her moving toward the buried city where Juan's chief, the American archaeologist, was taking his midday rest, waiting for his food. Juan and Maria Rosa, she burned all over now, as if a layer of tiny fig cactus bristles, as cruel as spun glass, had crawled under her skin. She wished to sit down quietly and wait for her death, but not until she had cut the throats of her man and that girl who were laughing and kissing under the corn stalks. Once, when she was a young girl, she had come back from market to find her jackal burned to a pile of ash, and her few silver coins gone. A dark, empty feeling had filled her. She kept moving about the place, not believing her eyes, expecting it all to take shape again before her. But it was gone. And though she knew an enemy had done it, she could not find out who it was, and could only curse and threaten the air. Now here was a worse thing, but she knew her enemy. Maria Rosa, that sinful girl, shameless. She heard herself saying a harsh, true word about Maria Rosa, saying it aloud as if she expected someone to agree with her. Yes, she is a whore. She has no right to live. At this moment, the gray, untidy head of Gibbons appeared over the edges of the newest trench he had caused to be dug in his field of excavations. The long, deep crevasses, in which a man might stand without being seen, lay crisscrossed like orderly gashes of a giant scalpel. Nearly all of the men of the community worked for Gibbons, helping him to uncover the lost city of their ancestors. They worked all the year through and prospered, digging every day for those small clay heads and bits of pottery and fragments of painted walls, for which there was no good use on earth, being all broken and encrusted with clay. They themselves could make better ones, perfectly stout and new, which they took to town and peddled to foreigners for real money. But the unearthly delight of the chief in finding these worn-out things was an endless puzzle. He would fairly roar for joy at times, waving a shattered pot or a human skull above his head, shouting for his photographer to come and make a picture of this. Now he emerged, and his young, enthusiast's eyes welcomed Maria Concepcion from his old man face, covered with hard wrinkles and burned to the color of red earth. I hope you've brought me a nice fat one. He selected a fowl from the bunch dangling nearest him as Maria Concepcion leaned over the trench. Dress it for me. There's a good girl. I'll broil it. Maria Concepcion took the fowl by the head and silently, swiftly drew her knife across its throat, twisting the head off with the casual firmness she might use with the top of a beet. Good God, woman, you do have nerve, said Givens, watching her. I can't do that. It gives me the creeps. My home country is Guadalajara, explained Maria Concepcion, without bravado, as she picked and gutted the fowl. She stood and regarded Givens condescendingly, that diverting white man who had no woman of his own to cook for him, and moreover appeared not to feel any loss of dignity in preparing his own food. He squatted now, eyes squinted, nose wrinkled to avoid the smoke, turning the roasting fowl busily on a stick. A mysterious man, undoubtedly rich, and Juan's chief, therefore to be respected, to be placated. The tortillas are fresh and hot, senor, she murmured gently. With your permission, I will now go to market. Yes, yes, run along. Bring me another of these tomorrow. Gibbons turned his head to look at her again. Her grand manner sometimes reminded him of royalty in exile. He noticed her unnatural paleness. The sun is too hot, eh? He asked. Yes, sir. Pardon me, but Juan will be here soon? He ought to be here now. Leave his food. The others will eat it. She moved away. The blue of her rebozo became a dancing spot in the heat waves that rose from the gray-red soil. Givens liked his Indians best when he could feel a fatherly indulgence for their primitive, childish ways. He told comic stories of Juan's escapades, of how often he had saved him in the past 5 years from going to jail, and even from being shot for his varied and always unexpected misdeeds. I am never a minute too soon to get him out of one pickle or another, he would say. Well, he's a good worker, and I know how to manage him. After Juan was married, he used to twit him with exactly the right shade of condescension on his many infidelities to Maria Concepcion. She'll catch you yet, and God help you, he was fond of saying, and Juan would laugh with immense pleasure. It did not occur to Maria Concepcion to tell Juan she had found him out. During the day, her anger against him died, and her anger against Maria Rosa grew. She kept saying to herself, when I was a young girl like Maria Rosa, if a man had caught hold of me so, I would have broken my jar over his head. She forgot completely that she had not resisted even so much as Maria Rosa on the day that Juan had first taken hold of her. Besides, she had married him afterwards in the church, and that was a very different thing. Juan did not come home that night, but went away to war, and Maria Rosa went with him. Juan had a rifle at his shoulder and 2 pistols at his belt. Maria Rosa wore a rifle also, slung on her back along with the blankets and the cooking pots. They joined the nearest detachment of troops in the field, and Maria Rosa marched ahead with the battalion of experienced women of war, which went over the crops like locusts, gathering provisions for the army. She cooked with them and ate with them what was left after the men had eaten. After battle, she went out on the field with the others to salvage clothing and ammunition and guns from the slain before they should begin to swell in the heat. Sometimes they would encounter the women from the other army, and a second battle as grim as the first would take place. There was no particular scandal in the village. People shrugged, grinned. It was far better that they were gone. The neighbors went around saying that Maria Rosa was safer in the army than she would be in the same village with Maria Concepcion. Maria Concepcion did not weep when Juan left her, and when the baby was born and died within 4 days, she did not weep. She is mere stone, said old Lupe, who went over and offered charms to preserve the baby. May you rot in hell with your charms, said Maria Concepcion. If she had not gone so regularly to church, lighting candles before the saints, kneeling with her arms spread in the form of a cross for hours at a time, and receiving Holy Communion every month, there might have been talk of her being devil-possessed. Her face was so changed and blind-looking. But this was impossible when, after all, she had been married by the priest. It must be, they reasoned, that she was being punished for her pride. They decided that this was the true cause for everything. She was altogether too proud. So they pitied her. During the year that Juan and Maria Rosa were gone, Maria Concepcion sold her fowls and looked after her garden, and her sack of hard coins grew. Lupe had no talent for bees, and the hives did not prosper. She began to blame Maria Rosa for running away and to praise Maria Concepcion for her behavior. She used to see Maria Concepcion at the market or at church, and she always said that no one could tell by looking at her now that she was a woman who had such a heavy grief. I pray God everything goes well with Maria Concepcion from this out, she would say, for she has had her share of trouble. When some idle person repeated this to the deserted woman, she went down to Lupe's house and stood within the clearing and called to the medicine woman, who sat in her doorway, stirring a mess of her infallible cure for sores. Keep your prayers to yourself, Lupe, or offer them for others who need them. I will ask God for what I want in this world. And will you get it, you think, Maria Concepcion? Asked Lupe, tittering cruelly and smelling the wooden mixing spoon. Did you pray for what you have now? Afterward, everyone noticed that Maria Concepcion went oftener to church, and even seldomer to the village to talk with the other women as they sat along the curb, nursing their babies and eating fruit at the end of the market day. Rosa, screaming and falling on her face in the road, was taken under the armpits by 2 guards and helped briskly to her jacal, now sadly run down. She was received with professional importance by Lupe, who helped the baby to be born at once. Limping with foot soreness, a layer of dust concealing his fine new clothes got mysteriously from somewhere. Juan appeared before the captain at the barracks. The captain recognized him as head digger for his good friend Gibbons, and dispatched a note to Gibbons saying, I am holding the person of Juan Villegas, awaiting your further disposition. When Gibbons showed up, Juan was delivered to him with the urgent request that nothing be made public about so humane and sensible an operation on the part of military authority. Juan walked out of the rather stifling atmosphere of the drumhead court, a definite air of swagger about him. His hat, of unreasonable dimensions, and embroidered with silver thread, hung over one eyebrow, secured at the back by a cord of silver dripping with bright blue tassels. His shirt was of a checkerboard pattern in green and black. His white cotton trousers were bound by a belt of yellow leather tooled in red. His feet were bare, full of stone bruises, and sadly ragged as to toenails. He removed his cigarette from the corner of his full-lipped, wide mouth. He removed the splendid hat. His black, dusty hair, pressed moistly to his forehead, sprang up suddenly in a cloudy thatch on his crown. He bowed to the officer, who appeared to be gazing at a vacuum. He swung his arm wide in a free circle, up-soaring towards the prison window, where forlorn heads poked over the windowsill, hot eyes following after the lucky departing one. 2 or 3 of the heads nodded, and a half-dozen hands were flipped at him in an effort to imitate his own casual and heady manner. Juan kept up this unsufferable pantomime until they rounded the first clump of fig cactus. Then he seized Gibbon's hand and burst into oratory. Blessed be the day your servant Juan Belegas first came under your eyes. From this day my life is yours without condition. 10,000 thanks with all my heart. For God's sake, stop playing the fool, said Gibbons irritably. Some day I'm going to be 5 minutes too late. Well, it is nothing much to be shot, my chief. Certainly you know I was not afraid. But to be shot in a drove of deserters against a cold wall, just in the moment of my homecoming, by order of that... Glittering epithets tumbled over one another like explosions of a rocket. All the scandalous analogies from the animal and vegetable worlds were applied in a vivid, unique, and personal way to the life, loves, and family history of the officer who had just set him free. When he had quite cursed himself dry and his nerves were soothed, he added, "With your permission, my chief." "What will Maria Concepcion say to all this?" asked Gibbons. "You are very informal, Juan, for a man who was married in the church." Juan put on his hat. "Oh, Maria Concepcion, that's nothing. Look, my chief, to be married in the church is a great misfortune for a man. After that, he is not himself any more. How can that woman complain when I do not drink, even at fiestas, enough to be really drunk? I do not beat her. Never, never. We were always at peace. I say to her, 'Come here,' and she comes straight. I say, 'Go there,' and she goes quickly. Yet sometimes I looked at her and thought, now I am married to that woman in the church, and I felt a sinking inside, as if something were lying heavy on my stomach. With Maria Rosa, it is all different. She is not silent. She talks. When she talks too much, I slap her and say, 'Silence, thou simpleton,' and she weeps. She is just a girl with whom I do as I please. You know how she used to keep those clean little bees in their hives? She is like their honey to me. I swear it. I would not harm Maria Concepcion, because I am married to her in the church. But also, my chief, I will not leave Maria Rosa, because she pleases me more than any other woman. Let me tell you, Juan, Things haven't been going as well as you think. You be careful. Someday, Maria Concepcion will just take your head off with that carving knife of hers. You keep that in mind. Juan's expression was the proper blend of masculine triumph and sentimental melancholy. It was pleasant to see himself in the role of hero of two such desirable women. He had just escaped from the threat of a disagreeable end. Clothes were new and handsome, and they had cost him just nothing. Maria Rosa had collected them for him here and there after battles. He was walking in the early sunshine, smelling the good smells of ripening cactus figs, peaches, and melons, of pungent berries dangling from the pepper trees, and the smoke of his cigarette under his nose. He was on his way to civilian life with his patient chief. His situation was ineffably perfect, and he swallowed it whole. My chief, he addressed Givens handsomely, as one man of the world to another. Women are good things, but not at this moment. With your permission, I will now go to the village and eat. My God, how I shall eat! Tomorrow morning, very early, I will come to the buried city and work like 7 men. Let us forget Maria Concepcion and Maria Rosa, each one in her place. I will manage them when the time comes. News of Juan's adventure soon got abroad, and Juan found many friends about him during the morning. They frankly commended his way of leaving the army. It was in itself the act of a hero. The new hero ate a great deal and drank somewhat, the occasion being better than a feast day. It was almost noon before he returned to visit Maria Rosa. He found her sitting on a clean straw mat, rubbing fat on her 3-hour-old son. Before this felicitous vision, Juan's emotions so twisted him that he returned to the village and invited every man in the Death and Resurrection pulque shop to drink with him. Having thus taken leave of his balance, he started back to Maria Rosa and found himself unaccountably in his own house, attempting to beat Maria Concepcion by way of re-establishing himself in his legal household. Maria Concepcion, knowing all the events of that unhappy day, was not in a yielding mood and refused to be beaten. She did not scream nor implore. She stood her ground and resisted. She even struck at him. Juan, amazed, hardly knowing what he did, stepped back and gazed at her inquiringly through a leisurely whirling film which seemed to have lodged behind his eyes. Certainly he had not even thought of touching her. Oh well, no harm done. He gave up, turned away, half asleep on his feet. He dropped amiably in a shadowed corner and began to snore. Concepcion, seeing that he was quiet, began to bind the legs of her fowls. It was market day, and she was late. She fumbled and tangled the bits of cord in her haste, and set off across the plowed fields instead of taking the accustomed road. She ran with a crazy panic in her head, her stumbling legs. Now and then she would stop and look about her, trying to place herself, then go on a few steps, until she realized that she was not going towards the market. At once she came to her senses completely, recognized the thing that troubled her so terribly, was certain of what she wanted. She sat down quietly under a sheltering thorny bush and gave herself over to her long devouring sorrow. The thing which had for so long squeezed her whole body into a tight, dumb knot of suffering suddenly broke with shocking violence. She jerked with the involuntary recoil of one who receives a blow, and the sweat poured from her skin as if the wounds of her whole life were shedding their salt ichor. Drawing her rebozo over her head, she bowed her forehead on her updrawn knees and sat there in deadly silence and immobility. From time to time, she lifted her head, where the sweat formed steadily and poured down her face, drenching the front of her chemise, and her mouth had the shape of crying, but there were no tears and no sound. All her being was a dark, confused memory of grief burning in her at night, of deadly, baffled anger eating at her by day, until her very tongue tasted bitter, and her feet were as heavy as if she were mired in the muddy roads during the time of rains. After a great while, she stood up and threw the rebozo off her face and set out walking again. Juan awakened slowly, with long yawns and grumblings, alternated with short relapses into sleep full of visions and clamors. A blur of orange light seared his eyeballs when he tried to unseal his lids. There came from somewhere a low voice weeping without tears, saying meaningless phrases over and over. He began to listen. He tugged at the leash of his stupor. He strained to grasp those words which terrified him, even though he could not quite hear them. Then he came awake with frightening suddenness, sitting up and staring at the long, sharpened streak of light piercing the corn husk walls from the level, disappearing sun. Maria Concepcion stood in the doorway, looming colossally tall to his betrayed eyes. She was talking quickly and calling his name. Then he saw her clearly. "God's name," said Juan, frozen to the marrow. "Here I am facing my death." For the long knife she wore habitually at her belt was in her hand. But instead, she threw it away, clear from her, and got down on her knees, crawling toward him, as he had seen her crawl many times toward the shrine at Guadalupe Villa. He watched her approach with such horror that the hair of his head seemed to be lifting itself away from him. Falling forward upon her face, she huddled over him, lips moving in a ghostly whisper. Her words became clear, and Juan understood them all. For a second he could not move nor speak. Then he took her head between both his hands and supported her in this way, saying swiftly, anxiously reassuring, almost in a babble, "O thou poor creature! O mad woman! O my Maria Concepcion unfortunate! Listen. Don't be afraid. Listen to me. I will hide thee away. I, thy own man, will protect thee. Quiet, not a sound." Trying to collect himself, he held her and cursed under his breath for a few moments in the gathering darkness. Maria Concepcion bent over, face almost on the ground, her feet folded under her, as if she would hide behind him. For the first time in his life, Juan was aware of danger. This was danger. Maria Concepcion would be dragged away between two gendarmes, with him following helpless and unarmed, to spend the rest of her days in Belen prison, maybe. Danger! The night swarmed with threats. He stood up and dragged her up with him. She was silent and perfectly rigid, holding to him with resistless strength, her hands stiffened on his arms. "Get me the knife," he told her in a whisper. She obeyed, her feet slipping along the hard earth floor, her shoulders straight, her arms close to her side. He lighted a candle. Maria Concepcion held the knife out to him. It was stained and dark, even to the handle, with drying blood. He frowned at her harshly, noting the same stains on her chemise and hands. "Take off thy clothes and wash thy hands," he ordered. He washed the knife carefully, and through the water wide of the doorway. She watched him and did likewise with the bowl in which she had bathed. "Light the brasero and cook for me," he told her in the same peremptory tone. He took her garments and went out. When he returned, she was wearing an old soiled dress and was fanning the fire in the charcoal burner. Seating himself cross-legged near her, he stared at her as a creature unknown to him, who bewildered him utterly, for whom there was no possible explanation. She did not turn her head, but kept silent and still, except for the movements of her strong hands fanning the blaze which cast sparks and small jets of white smoke, flaring and dying rhythmically with the motion of the fan, lighting her face and darkening it by turns. Juan's voice barely disturbed the silence. "Listen to me carefully and tell me the truth. And when the gendarmes come here for us, thou shalt have nothing to fear. But there will be something for us to settle between us afterward." The light from the charcoal burner shone in her eyes. A yellow phosphorescence glimmered behind the dark iris. "For me, everything is settled now," she answered, in a tone so tender, so grave, so heavy with suffering, that Juan felt his vitals contract. He wished to repent openly, not as a man, but as a very small child. He could not fathom her, nor himself, nor the mysterious fortunes of life grown so instantly confused where all had seemed so gay and simple. He felt, too, that she had become invaluable, a woman without equal among a million women, and he could not tell why. He drew an enormous sigh that rattled in his chest. "Yes, yes, it is all settled. I shall not go away again. We must stay here together." Whispering, he questioned her, and she answered whispering, and he instructed her over and over until she had her lesson by heart. The hostile darkness of the night encroached upon them, flowing over the narrow threshold, invading their hearts. It brought with it sighs and murmurs, the pad of secretive feet in the nearby road, the sharp staccato whimper of wind through the cactus leaves. All these familiar, once friendly cadences were now invested with sinister terrors. A dread, formless and uncontrollable, took hold of them both. "Light another candle," said Juan, loudly, in too resolute, too sharp a tone. "Let us eat now." They sat facing each other and ate from the same dish, after their old habit. Neither tasted what they ate. With food halfway to his mouth, Juan listened. The sound of voices rose, spread, widened at the turn of the road along the cactus wall. A spray of lantern light shot through the hedge. A single voice slashed the blackness, ripped the fragile layer of silence suspended above the hut. Juan Villegas! Pass, friends, Juan roared back cheerfully. They stood in the doorway, simple, cautious gendarmes from the village, mixed bloods themselves with Indian sympathies known to all the community. They flashed their lanterns almost apologetically upon the pleasant, harmless scene of a man eating supper with his wife. Pardon, brother, said the leader. Someone has killed the woman, Maria Rosa, and we must question her neighbors and friends. He paused and added with an attempt at severity, Naturally, naturally, agreed Juan. You know that I was a good friend of Maria Rosa. This is bad news. They all went away together, the men walking in a group, Maria Concepcion following a few steps in the rear near Juan. No one spoke. The 2 points of candlelight at Maria Rosa's head fluttered uneasily. The shadow shifted and dodged on the stained, darkened walls. To Maria Concepcion, everything in the smothering and closing room shared an evil restlessness. The watchful faces of those called as witnesses, the faces of old friends, were made alien by the look of speculation in their eyes. The ridges of the rose-colored rebozo thrown over the body varied continually, as though the thing it covered was not perfectly in repose. Her eyes swerved over the body in the open, painted coffin, from the candle tips at the head to the feet, jutting up thinly, the small scarred soles protruding, freshly washed, a mass of crooked, half-healed wounds, thorn pricks, and cuts of sharp stones. Her gaze went back to the candle flame, to Juan's eyes warning her, to the gendarmes talking among themselves. Her eyes would not be controlled. With a leap that shook her, her gaze settled upon the face of Maria Rosa. Instantly her blood ran smoothly again. There was nothing to fear. Even the restless light could not give a look of life to that fixed countenance. She was dead. Maria Concepcion felt her muscles give way softly. Her heart began beating steadily without effort. She knew no more rancor against that pitiable thing, lying indifferently in its blue coffin under the fine silk rebozo. The mouth drooped sharply at the corners in a grimace of weeping arrested halfway. The brows were distressed. The dead flesh could not cast off the shape of its last terror. All finished. Maria Rosa had eaten too much honey and had too much love. Now she must sit in hell, crying over her sins and her hard death forever and ever. Old Lupe's cackling voice arose. She had spent the morning helping Maria Rosa, and it had been hard work. The child had spat blood the moment it was born, a bad sign. She thought then that bad luck would come to the house. Well, about sunset she was in the yard at the back of the house, grinding tomatoes and peppers. She had left her mother and babe asleep. She heard a strange noise in the house, a choking and smothered calling, like someone wailing in sleep. Well, such a thing is only natural. But there followed a light, quick, thudding sound. Like the blows of a fist? Interrupted an officer. No, not at all like such a thing. How do you know? I am well acquainted with that sound, friends, retorted Lupe. This was something else. She was at a loss to describe it exactly. A moment later there came the sound of pebbles rolling and slipping under feet. Then she knew someone had been there and was running away. Why did you wait so long before going to see? I am old and hard in the joints, said Lupe. I cannot run after people. I walked as fast as I could to the cactus hedge, for it is only by this way that anyone can enter. There was no one in the road, sir, no one. 3 cows with a dog driving them, nothing else. When I got to Maria Rosa, she was lying all tangled up, and from her neck to her middle she was full of knife holes. It was a sight to move the blessed image himself. Her eyes were— Never mind. Who came oftenest to her house before she went away? Did you know her enemies? Lupe's face congealed, closed. Her spongy skin drew into a network of secretive wrinkles. She turned withdrawn and expressionless eyes upon the gendarmes. I am an old woman. I do not see well. I cannot hurry on my feet. I know no enemy of Maria Rosa. I did not see anyone leave the clearing. You did not hear splashing in the spring near the bridge? No, sir. Why, then, do our dogs follow a scent there and lose it? God only knows, my friend. I am an yes, how did the footfalls sound? Like the tread of an evil spirit. Lupe broke forth in a swelling, oracular tone that startled them. The Indians stirred uneasily, glanced at the dead, then at Lupe. They half expected her to produce the evil spirit among them at once. The gendarme began to lose his temper. No, poor unfortunate. Were they heavy or light? The footsteps of a man or a woman? Was the person shod or barefoot? A glance at the listening circle assured Lupe of their thrilled attention. She enjoyed the dangerous importance of her situation. She could have ruined that Maria Concepcion with a word. But it was even sweeter to make fools of these gendarmes who went about spying on honest people. She raised her voice again. What she had not seen she could not describe. Thank God! No one could harm her because her knees were stiff, and she could not run even to seize a murderer. As for knowing the difference between footfalls, shod or bare, man or woman, nay, between devil and human, who ever heard of such madness? My eyes are not ears, gentlemen, she ended grandly. But upon my heart, I swear those footsteps fell as the tread of the spirit of evil. Imbecile, yapped the leader in a shrill voice. Take her away, one of you. Now, Juan Villegas, tell me. Juan told his story patiently, several times over. He had returned to his wife that day. She had gone to market as usual. He had helped her prepare her fowls. She had returned about mid-afternoon. They had talked. She had cooked. They had eaten. Nothing was amiss. Then the gendarmes came with the news about Maria Rosa. That was all. Yes, Maria Rosa had run away with him. But there had been no bad blood between him and his wife on this account, nor between his wife and Maria Rosa. Everybody knew that his wife was a quiet woman. Maria Concepcion heard her own voice answering without a break. It was true, at first she was troubled when her husband went away. But after that, she had not worried about him. It was the way of men, she believed. She was a church-married woman and knew her place. Well, he had come home at last. She had gone to market, but had come back early, because now she had her man to cook for. That was all. Other voices broke in. A toothless old man said, "She is a woman of good reputation among us, and Maria Rosa was not." A smiling young mother, Anita, baby at breast, said, "If no one thinks so, how can you accuse her? It was the loss of her child and not of her husband that changed her so." Another, "Maria Rosa had a strange life apart from us. How do we know who might have come from another place to do her evil?" And old Soledad spoke up boldly. "When I saw Maria Concepcion in the market today, I said, 'Good luck to you, Maria Concepcion. This is a happy day for you.' And she gave Maria Concepcion a long, easy stare and the smile of a born wise woman. Maria Concepcion suddenly felt herself guarded, surrounded, upborne by her faithful friends. They were around her, speaking for her, defending her. The forces of life were ranged invincibly with her against the beaten dead. Maria Rosa had thrown away her share of strength in them. She lay forfeited among them. Maria Concepcion looked from one to the other of the circling, intent faces. Their eyes gave back reassurance, understanding, a secret and mighty sympathy. The gendarmes were at a loss. They, too, felt that sheltering wall cast impenetrably around her. They were certain she had done it, and yet they could not accuse her. Nobody could be accused. There was not a shred of true evidence. They shrugged their shoulders and snapped their fingers and shuffled their feet. Well then, good night to everybody. Many pardons for having intruded. Good health. A small bundle lying against the wall at the head of the coffin squirmed like an eel. A wail, a mere sliver of sound, issued. Maria Concepcion took the son of Maria Rosa in her arms. "He is mine," she said clearly. "I will take him with me." No one assented in words, but an approving nod, a bare breath of complete agreement, stirred among them as they made way for her. Maria Concepcion, carrying the child, followed Juan from the clearing. The hut was left with its lighted candles and a crowd of old women who would sit up all night drinking coffee and smoking and telling ghost stories. Juan's exultation had burned out. There was not an ember of excitement left in him. He was tired. The perilous adventure was over. Maria Rosa had vanished, to come no more forever. Their days of marching, of eating, of quarreling and making love between battles were all over. Tomorrow he would go back to dull and endless labor. He must descend into the trenches of the buried city, as Maria Rosa must go into her grave. He felt his veins fill up with bitterness, with black, unendurable melancholy. Oh, Jesus, what bad luck overtakes a man! Well, there was no way out of it now. For the moment he craved only to sleep. He was so drowsy he could scarcely guide his feet. The occasional light touch of the woman at his elbow was as unreal, as ghostly as the brushing of a leaf against his face. He did not know why he had fought to save her, and now he forgot her. There was nothing in him, except a vast blind hurt like a covered wound. He entered the jacal and, without waiting to light a candle, threw off his clothing, sitting just within the door. He moved with lagging, half-awake hands to strip his body of its heavy finery. With a long, groaning sigh of relief, he fell straight back on the floor, almost instantly asleep, his arms flung up and outward. Maria Concepcion, a small clay jar in her hand, approached the gentle little mother goat tethered to a sapling, which gave and yielded as she pulled at the rope's end after the farthest reaches of grass about her. The kid, tied up a few feet away, rose bleating, its feathery fleece shivering in the fresh wind. Sitting on her heels, holding his tether, she allowed him to suckle a few moments. Afterward, all her movements very deliberate and even, she drew a supply of milk for the child. She sat against the wall of her house near the doorway. The child, fed and asleep, was cradled in the hollow of her crossed legs. The silence overfilled the world. The skies flowed down evenly to the rim of the valley. The stealthy moon crept slantwise to the shelter of the mountains. She felt soft and warm all over. She dreamed that the newly born child was her own, and she was resting deliciously. Maria Concepcion could hear Juan's breathing. The sound vapored from the low doorway, calmly. The house seemed to be resting after a burdensome day. She breathed, too, very slowly and quietly, each inspiration saturating her with repose. The child's light, faint breath was a mere shadowy moth of sound in the silver air. The night, the earth under her, seemed to swell and recede together with a limitless, unhurried, benign breathing. She dropped and closed her eyes, feeling the slow rise and fall within her own body. She did not know what it was, but it eased her all through. Even as she was falling asleep, head bowed over the child, she was still aware of a strange, wakeful happiness.